Thank you for being here with us today, Professor. So we'll get started with the first question. It's just, can you tell us a little about yourself, your name, where were you born, and where you grew up?
Good morning. Thank you so much for choosing me. I feel so privileged. So my name is, in Romanian, Julieta Cristina Paulesc. In English is Julie Paulesc. This is my married name. That used to be Paulescu, Escu being an ending typical for Romanian last names. Somehow we lost the U, so people really don't know how to take it. I was born in a city called Lipova in the western part of Romania a long time ago. You don't want to know how long ago. And I've been living in the United States since 1994. So it's been quite a few years now, 30, 29.
Okay, so why did you decide to come to the United States in 1994, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that?
I don't mind at all. And it was not what, it was who. I got married. My husband was here. My husband is also Romanian. He came to the United States in 1978. His family requested political asylum for religious persecution because his parents were Baptist, and during communism, religious was highly discouraged. So they immigrated when he was 14 years old. Our parents kept in touch, or rather my grandmother and his mother kept in touch because they've known each other since Romania. And eventually we got married in 1993 and I came here in 1994.
Did you settle in Arizona right when you came to the United States, or did you come here after you were in the United States for some time?
That's a good question. No, I came to Cleveland, Ohio, where there is a pretty large Romanian community and where my husband's family arrived in 1978 and never moved from there. So I'm not sure if we are an atypical case. Some people stay where they're at their original arrival point. Others migrate throughout the United States. Our journey was quite diverse. So after spending several months in Cleveland, after living through a horrific winter, what seemed to me like a horrific winter, it was snowy and cold and ugly, we decided to visit my husband's uncle in Arizona, and we encountered beautiful blue skies and this very pleasant temperature. It was not in August or in July. So we fell in love with Arizona. We moved here. Things did not work out for us. And we decided to move to Dallas. Prior to coming to the United States, while still a student, I worked for the French Cultural Center in my hometown in Timișoara. My undergraduate degree is in French. So I was seeking some sort of navigating in teaching French or doing something with my French. So when we moved from Arizona to Dallas, I had actually secured an interview at an international school in Dallas, where I was hoping to be able to teach French. Things did not work out for me, because I had probably the most horrible interview in my life. The director was absolutely terrible. She first of all, she let me wait for about a half an hour prior to seeing me. And then as soon as I walked in, she said, no, we only hire native speakers. Although my French was nearly native, I'm a superior French language speaker. So, and I was very confident in my skills, but she dismissed me immediately. And then she invited me to wait again in the hallway because she was taking a private phone call. And I was hoping that she would come back and invite me in to continue our conversation. She just popped her head out door after about an hour and said, "Oh, that's it. That's all we have to talk about," and closed the door. So that's some of, because you're talking about migration, about struggles and challenges, and about loss of social status, and about humiliation. I thought this would be an example that would be illuminating for you. So anyways, international school did not work out for me, but I was hired at Western Union, where they had a trilingual department, customer service for French-speaking countries and Spanish-speaking countries. So we spent 7 years there. I worked for about 5 years at IBM, and then I'm at Western Union, and then I moved to IBM to do again a bilingual job for Canada. And after 7 years in Dallas, we finally moved here.
So when coming to Arizona, were you able to find a Romanian or other type of Balkan community to integrate to? And like, is there a strong Romanian diaspora in Arizona, or even just in the United States, like in all of these states that you've moved around in?
So when I came to Arizona, I came because I found a job teaching Romanian at ASU. So the fact that not only do we have a community here, but we also have an academic program was very enticing. And yes, there is a very large Romanian community. I cannot tell you how many people are here, despite the fact that there have been several attempts to a census, but we still don't know how many people. There's a large community, and yesterday, as a matter of fact, were 2 events that happened simultaneously. One was the Romanian Film Festival at the Majestic in Tempe at its 3rd edition. And the second one was the second day of the Romanian Folk Festival at the Orthodox Church. So yes, there's a large community of Romanians in the Valley. And throughout the United States, yes, there is a very large community in Chicago where there's actually a Romanian Cultural Center. There are communities in Sacramento, in Detroit, in Cleveland, in Texas. I think they're in Dallas and Atlanta, not as large, but there are communities throughout the United States. Yes, in Minnesota, there is a very large and very significant community, and that community contributed in a very notable way to preserving the Romanian history of migration. They actually secured a grant several years ago and produced, I think, 2 or 3 films with interviews taken with second and third generation Romanian Americans. Some of them then don't even speak the language, but they have vivid memories of their grandparents, and great-grandparents, and they were able to sort of produce an oral history of that community, one of the oldest in the United States.
Wow, interesting. Okay. So then continuing off that, what is your involvement in the Romanian diaspora in Arizona? Can you talk a little bit about your involvement in creating the Arizona American Romanian Culture Society, what this organization is doing to sustain and share Romanian culture?
So my involvement is academic and in terms of community. I've been teaching Romanian language and culture in the School of International Letters and Cultures for the last 20 years. And I have been coordinating language courses. So the purpose of these courses is to target multiple categories of learners, to promote Romanian language and culture to English speakers, and so non-Romanians, and to help Romanian students maintain their language. So we have people who've never heard of Romania or its language before in our classes, and kids who are either born here, heritage learners, or kids who came here recently, so they're native speakers who who want to preserve their language. So on that side of language preservation and teaching, I just described my involvement. Now, the American Romanian Cultural Society was born from a need to promote Romanian culture, a different perspective, let me say, a different facets of Romanian culture, because there is already at the Romanian church, there has been a festival that showcases and promotes traditional cultural values. And we're talking about material culture there. There we're talking about costumes, we're talking about food, about music. So that's something that already exists. But we wanted to showcase contemporary Romanian achievers, cultural achievements such as film, literature, art, the art. So we wanted to provide a pretty complex and comprehensive lens through Romanian culture, to Romanian culture in that society.
No, that's really interesting how, because I mean there's like a lot of those individual ethnic festivals, especially in October and this month. I mean, last weekend was Serb Fest. I'm in the Serbian diaspora. So that's like a big event. Last month was Bulgarian Fest, Greek Fest. So yeah, like a lot of them are working on preserving that full culture, which is really important. But then I think it's also important, like you said, to preserve, like to keep people connected to their homelands by sharing like what's happening in contemporary society, what's happening in modern life. I think that's like an element that some diasporic communities are missing.
Well, I'm not sure if are they missing it really? What's the situation in the
I think
Serbian community?
to some extent. I've noticed in the Serbian community, for example, like a lot of people listen to pop music and all that, all those songs that are popular on TikTok and whatnot. But I think in terms of like contemporary society, understanding like what life is like there today, because they know what life was like in the former Yugoslavia when their parents and grandparents left. But then when they go there, they have this conception of what it was like when their families used to live there and not so much what it's like today. And
Mhm.
I think it's important to, you know, keep up with it as best as you can, as well as keeping up with like folk culture and your traditions, because I think both are really significant.
Right. And you know what, people, when people return, depending on how frequently they return, they find changes absolutely striking. And I found changes absolutely striking. And I recently, I don't know, I think my roots are pulling me back there, because I'm tempted now to visit more and more. Although my parents are no longer alive, I still have family members whom I love very much and who are really eager to see me. So when I go there, I'm also trying to understand the changes. And I've noticed so many changes, even in terms of language, in terms of interpersonal relationships. There's a lot of language contact and cultural practices that are borrowed from America, for instance, that are very striking. We used to be a very formal culture. We used to be a Francophile culture. And even the language itself had features that showcased a certain relationship. For instance, if you guys speak French, do you guys speak French? Did you study French?
I took it for 6 years, but I don't speak it, but I understand a lot.
Oh, so then you know that there are two pronouns, tu and vous. Tu is informal, vous is formal. And in the 18th century, even married couples called each other vous. It was a level of reverence, right? Which was sort of inherited or copied rather in Romania during the 19th century, 20th century. People were extremely polite. And that disappeared. It disappeared. People are very informal now. Why? Because they are modeling American behavior. And even the linguistic reality of English, we don't have such formality. You is you. right? So you go to the restaurant, and where you expect people to call you the equivalent of vous, they call you tu, which is the equivalent of tu. And then do we know each other? So I can only imagine how people who did not connect with the country on a regular basis must feel, probably terrified.
Yeah, when I was younger, I went back with my dad. My mom went to Serbia and Montenegro. It was my dad's first time going back in 17 years, and it was very interesting to see it through his eyes, like seeing the country where he was born for the first time in 17 years, and just how many changes there are. And even for me, I grew up learning Serbian, and speaking it with my family, but I go back frequently to Serbia now, and I've noticed a lot of English words seeping into the Serbian vocabulary, which has been very interesting for me because I learned the actual Serbian words, and they're like, no, like this is how we say it in modern society. And I'm like, but wait, where are the Serbian words? Like they say, instead of saying like, oh, a nice place in Serbian, they say like fancy, the English word, and then place, like fancy mesto.
Yeah,
Fancy. And I'm like, what? Wait. Like I get confused when I hear English. So that I think that's a really fun thing, but it's also kind of sad because I'm like, oh, like we're losing some of that vocabulary and those formalities, like you were talking about.
Yeah. But it's been forever like this. Language contact was always in place. And when we all got swept by the Ottoman Empire, things changed. And when we got swept by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Serbia did too, things changed. And we borrowed word from German, from Hungarian, from everywhere. You can't stop that. We don't live in the ivory tower.
It's interesting how you pointed out about the formalities, right? Speaking with like my grandparents, that's something like that they've brought up to my attention like throughout the like past few years, how the way you interact with like elders, specifically like elders, like the respect and like vocab has changed. So in Bulgarian, it's like the same, and it's similar in French. It's like ti I vie. So it's like vie, you speak in the vie when you don't know the person, right?
Exactly.
And or when it's somebody that's like older, or it's like respectful, and like throughout the years, like that's kind of
dissipated.
Dissipating. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But I never connected that with trying to meld to or mold to like American culture.
I've been watching sort of the equivalent of, well, it's actually the voice of Romania rather than the voice in America, right? That version. And the jurors, or the whatever, however you call them, the jurors, right? In the show, they throw Anglicized words left and right. And I think it's probably, it gives them a sense of confidence as, well, here we have an international like show, and we are great musicians comparable to Americans. So why not just throw some English words there? Makes us feel special.
Mm-hmm.
On that note of language, still keeping on the same topic, so a lot of members of the Balkan diaspora either learn their heritage language during childhood through just being with family, or they try to learn at some point in their lives. We've noticed this with some of our interviewees who are around our age and are trying to get into their languages and cultures, because it's an important mechanism to sustain our individual cultures, our collective culture in the United States. So as a linguistic and a professor of the Romanian language and culture, can you talk more about this importance of language learning and how that maintains ties to culture and whatnot? I think you touched a little bit on that earlier.
So preserving one's identity is definitely very important, and certain parents are very particular about maintaining a native language at home, while others want their children to be exposed to English mostly. So what I have noticed in my teaching career is exactly what you have noticed, that it comes an age, it comes a time in close to adulthood when children who have not been exposed to the language, or maybe not as much at home, seek to connect with their cultural heritage in more than one way, in more than just going and attending festivals. They actually sign up for classes and they want to learn as much as possible about their heritage. So it is obviously very important to teach children where they come from. And in our household, we discuss ad nauseum, and I think my children are ready to lecture everybody around about life under communism, because there are times that marked us. For me, it was my formative years, and it was the only thing that we knew. And now we have the opportunity to actually look back and assess our situation and learn from the various situations that we went through. And I think it's a great tool to connect with our children. Storytelling, that's actually my recently acquired expertise, is digital storytelling. So I cannot stress enough how important storytelling can be for once everything, starting with personal identity to health, mental health, to it's an absolutely critical, essential component of one's development and interpersonal communication. Everything is done through storytelling.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we had, like, our next question was if you could speak on the importance of oral history and maintaining digital narratives, because that is our primary goal with Balkan America. So.
And I applaud you for that, because I think it's a wonderful project. I teach a course on migration and identity through digital stories. And while adapting to current consumption practices, where people don't have the patience to listen to a 45-minute interview and we're shrinking to a 3 to 5 minute story, we are also examining stories of migration from around the globe. And students are learning about struggles, but also about achievements of migrants. And from that, we actually expanded to other areas such as homelessness, poverty, disability. So everything that can be told and listened from. But I think you're doing an outstanding job, because this is absolutely critical. It is absolutely critical to maintain some form of record keeping. And oral history captures more than just writing. It captures faces and gestures and accents. And I think you found the perfect project to serve your communities while learning about others. So brilliant choice.
Many negative stereotypes exist about the Balkan region, where individuals from this ethnic group are oftentimes labeled as semi-developed or savage. In your dissertation, Government, God, and Family, a multi-model analysis of stories and storytelling in an online social movement, you describe Romania as a country of intersections, contradictions, and paradoxes, where Romanians have been subjected to fascism, communism, a post-communist economic and moral collapse, and ongoing corruption at all levels of society, circumstances which in turn lead to several waves of migration. These historical realities serve as the base for several distinct myths about what constitutes Romanianness. So can you speak a little bit about these pre-existing negative narratives as a member of the Romanian diaspora living in America?
I think the first stereotype that we encounter when we disclose our ethnicity is a comparison, the negative image of the Roma community. every time you say, I'm Romanian, they will say, oh, you're a gypsy. And then we have a tendency to defend ourselves very, very vehemently. No, I'm not a gypsy. We are not like them. And unfortunately, that reveals our ignorance. Because really, if we look very carefully at the Roma history and the centuries of racial discrimination, we would probably answer differently. But that is one of the most commonly encountered comparisons. You are a Roma, and then there's immediately that defensive mechanism that comes into place. No, we're not, because the Roma are not the Roma, I'm sorry, gypsies. We really don't want to be politically correct. We want to be just blunt and insulting, and we don't call them Roma. So I believe that that's something that you will frequently encounter, a negative stereotype. I'm not quite sure if I'm aware of too many stereotypes created by the American community. I am more aware of ways in which we stereotype different groups within the community. So within the community, you will find various categories. People are placed into different categories based on their religious affiliation or based on the place where they come from in Romania. And I'm certain that this exists everywhere in the Balkans, because obviously there are some traits, for personality traits for people coming from various regions. There are also physical traits. So I hear very oftentimes people within the Romanian community in the United States describing the other in not very favorable ways based on these two criteria: religious affiliation and regional affiliation. And this is not just happening in the Romanian American community. It happens in Romania as well. People from Moldova, for instance, are oftentimes criticized by others from Ardeal or Banat. People from the south, from around the capital city, are criticizing people from Transylvania and vice versa. And that has a lot to do with the way in which our geography worked throughout the centuries. Because Transylvania was for over 200 years very strongly influenced by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The South was influenced by the Ottoman Empire. So there are different cultural differences that enable these differences in behavior and even in appearance, because there are mixtures of different skin tones even, and language. There are different varieties of Romanian, and the different accent reveals that person's belonging to a certain geographical and cultural space. And that could be also a trigger for stereotyping and rejection even. That's what I'm talking about, intersections. And because Romania is geographically at an intersection between, first of all, situated between or surrounded by people who speak languages that are completely different. We speak a Romance language. Romanian is Latin-based. Everyone around us, minus Hungarians, speak a Slavic language. we are at the intersection of three former empires: Russian, Tsarist Russia, Ottoman Empire, and Austro-Hungarian Empire, at the intersection of Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Islam. So we are right there, and everything is pouring in and goes through. And all this migration that happened throughout centuries left many traces within our language and behavior and way of life and mentalities and so on and so forth.
Relating this back to stereotypes reflected in immigrants living in America, what are different waves of Romanian migration to the US in terms of timeframes and types of people that moved here? Have these different waves of people and generations done different things to preserve Romanian culture in the US?
Well, migration to the United States began in the 1800s, and people who migrated here were generally what's called now circular migrants. So people who move elsewhere for the mere goal of earning enough money to build back home. So the sending country is always at the forefront of migration goal, used to be, yes. And then once people arrived here, they determined that perhaps they would like to stay. So the first wave of migrants from Romania were farmers, and they settled in areas that enabled them to continue their craft. They were not necessarily very educated people, so they settled in either in the Minnesota, that area,
The Great Lakes region.
Areas, exactly, because it provided fertile ground to continue their agriculture. Some of them were even in Canada. And either they began to create small communities, some created small communities where obviously they spoke Romanian, they were not exposed to the urban environment, they were not exposed to too many people, all they did was their farming, so they maintained very closely their traditions and language and so on and so forth. Some of them went back and forth. There is a very interesting documentary called 1,000 and Back, or there used to be the saying that we are going for 1,000 and the fair, which meant that they came here, worked, earned $1,000 to go home with it, to buy land, and then they needed enough money for their boat fare back to Romania. So 1,000 at the fair is the money that they wanted to take home to buy more land and the cost of return. And there's a writer in New York, his name is Adrian Sângeorjan, who has several collections of short stories, and they're fascinating. He actually talks about his great grandfather, who was a circular migrant, who purchased multiple plots of land in Romania, very fertile plots of land, and every time he would return to Romania, his wife would get pregnant. So then he would leave his wife behind, a pregnant wife. She would give birth to another child whom he would not meet until the next time he would go back there with 1,000 and the fair and have another child. So that family never made it back here because that men decided to return permanently. Why? Because by the time he went back and forth several times, multiple groups of Romanians migrated to urban areas because the society began to step into massive industrialization, and there were factories built and possibilities for employment. So now we have an internal migration from rural to urban. And many people worked in factories. This particular character, he's a book character, but he's based on a real migrant. He worked in the meat factory. So conditions were extremely harsh. And conditions were extremely harsh even 30, 40 years ago. My mother-in-law worked as a seamstress in the factory in Cleveland. I don't know what the correct name is. I only know the name that they created for that factory, Joseph and Feiss, but I don't know if that's actually the name of it. I just know that it was purchased by Hugo Boss. So she worked there as a seamstress together with a lot of Romanian women and women from Serbia, from the border, from Banatul Sârbesc, the Serbian Banat, women who spoke Romanian. Their supervisor, a male, was the only person who spoke English. So they had no agency. They had no ability to communicate, no ability to get informed. They did not know what minimum wage was. They did not know how to express their discontent about their working conditions. So it was pretty much a sweatshop from what she describes it. So these are certain types of migrants. So we have these farmers who came in the 18th century during at the revolution of 1848. That was a revolution, that was a European revolution, right? Some Romanians felt compelled to return because of patriotic feelings of belonging to the country and being in solidarity with their countrymen. They returned. Then between in the interwar period, there was another wave of migration. And during communism, people defected all the time. And during communism, there were different kinds of migrants. Migrants who literally took their own faith in their own hands and crossed the Danube and took all the risks in the world to arrive eventually into Yugoslavia, crossing the Danube, from Yugoslavia, hopefully into Italy or Austria, and turn themselves in to what is that? International High Commission for Refugees.
Mhm.
And then they were given the option to come to the United States or to go to Canada. And I have friends in the Romanian community whom I've interviewed about that particular type of migration. Others, such as literary figures, were sent into exile because they were inconvenient. They were vocal. So they had, some of them were originally sent to jail, silenced that way. And if they chose not to be silent, completely silent, then they were asked to please not go somewhere and just not come back. So it was an exile. At the fall of communism, we had another wave of migration. Initially, people were super excited to rebuild the country after the economy was completely devastated by communism. And then shortly after, they realized that it takes a certain type of survivor skills to live in that society, because everybody was extremely, extremely eager to succeed through any means. So somehow after a couple of years from the revolution, there was another wave of migration. Most recently, many people arrived through the lottery visa. I don't know if you're aware of that system. So some of Romanians here are highly educated, because yes, we say that the lottery is random. Well, I highly doubt it, because you need to fill out a lot of papers, and you must meet certain qualifications, including the fact that you have to be highly educated. So the last batch of people who came here were people who had generally university degrees. So that's pretty much our trajectory, and I'm certain that it's just one of these trajectories, and that Bulgarians and Serbians are very close to the type of migration that Romanians went through is very close to the type of migration that your communities experienced.
My like family friend, like I remember like when I was learning about like different migration stories, that was like one of them, where that's how my friend's mom's brother, that's like the path that he decided to take.
Mhm.
He like said he was going fishing one day and
Yeah.
then just never came home from fishing and just went through Yugoslavia and decided to go to Canada instead of America. But yeah.
But you know what? Many of these people who never came home because they were in jail, not because they made it successfully. Lots of people lost their lives crossing over because either sides of the Danube were very closely watched, and they were shooting indiscriminately. But once you arrived into Yugoslavia, you were subjected to an interview, and you had to very clearly prove that your return to Romania, should you be returned to Romania, would put your life in danger. So it's pretty much the same thing that happens at our southern border now, with people who come from South America, Central America, places where there's high violence. In order to receive asylum, so asylum seekers must present a very solid argument of why they should be accepted in the United States. It's an entire narrative. It's an entire story.
That's like why a lot of people would like lie about like leaving or where they were going, what they were doing, not only for their own sake, but like for their family's sake, right? Because like with Bulgaria, at least how it was like during communism, like you couldn't leave, or you couldn't leave the country without like credentials, without permission. And so that's why like a lot of people would lie about where they were going or the means that they would take to leave, because then their entire family would go under investigation, their entire family would be punished.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another way of legal migration from Romania had to do with Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter was president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, you know, he comes from the Bible Belt, and he's a very, very devout Baptist. He enabled mass migration of Baptists from Eastern Europe, especially from Romania. So that is when my in-laws came here during Jimmy Carter's period. And that is when many people converted to neo-Protestant religions, either Baptist or Pentecostals. And while never disclosed, I have a suspicion that, and not documented, I didn't really conduct thorough academic research, but from talking to people, I have a sense that they might have chosen to convert from Orthodoxy to either Pentecostal or Baptist, so that they would be considered for potential migration.
Our goal with Balkan in America is to build connections between these individual ethnic diasporas. to create more of a unified Balkan diaspora, as well as to celebrate our individual ethnic diasporas. So what do you think about this notion of the Balkan diaspora and building peace in America and building bridges?
I think that while we do not have a formal united Balkanic diaspora, I think that because we share so many similarities and ways of lives and practices, we are actually a larger community in spirit, not necessarily formally, but my friends go to Bulgarian festivals and Greek festivals and Serbian festivals. And in Gilbert here, at one point, we had an association or a committee or whatever for international cultural events. And I attended a couple of those. And I have friends from Serbia who invite me to their festivals and I invite them to ours. So I think that whilst not formalized, I think we because we share so many similarities, we have this imagined community. I don't know if you're familiar with the term.
I read something about the imagined community.
Right. And I don't think we have a counter narrative to that. I've never heard of having any kind of issues with each other, really. I think it's has been always a very harmonious relationship among the various communities from Eastern Europe.
So our last question to close off this interview, do you have any plans on how you will continue to preserve your Romanian culture in the US, and any tips for the audience on preserving their Balkan culture?
Well, I have a lot of plans because they're part of my job, and it's not just my job, is my calling. So I'm here to serve Romanian language and culture and people who want to know about it. So yes, we have a lot of plans as individuals and as a program. This Thursday we're hosting a gentleman, Denis Delatant, who wrote for the last 50 years about Romania. So we're going to have a book launch. I'm not sure what advice I would have because I can't really blame people for not sending their children to my courses to learn Romanian. Times have changed, and as much as we fear that we may lose our essence and our culture, I cannot blame people who are sending their children to learn other languages. It gives them opening towards other cultures and understanding of other people. I really doubt that our essence will die. Even if we have a little bit left of it, there's still hope. We don't really have to do the whole ritual. It's enough to color eggs for Easter, and it's enough to say a prayer, or it's enough to do the very, very fundamental things that define us as Eastern European, religious or cultural, or whatever it is. Yeah, stick to it, yes, by all means. But if times are dictating otherwise, and if your children want to learn about something else, I encourage mine to do so. We have been in this country for quite a long time, all of our communities, and we're doing fine. You are reviving oral history, you are preserving, so we're okay. We're going to be fine.